Good morning to all our guests on the West Coast, and good afternoon to everyone in the middle and on the East Coast. Welcome to our panel discussion today on future-proofing EV charging infrastructure through open standards. I'm Nino Cara. I'm the President of Electric Autonomy Canada, and I'm delighted to have been invited by SWTCH Energy to moderate today's discussion. The purpose of the panel today is to share some knowledge on the choices that developers, property managers, and site hosts have when it comes to installing EV charging infrastructure. So in particular, we'll be talking about what open standards, or OCPP, as some of you may have heard of it referred to as, the Open Charge Point Protocol, what it means and some of the benefits for it, and also some of the downsides as well. So before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. We are recording today's session, and we will be sharing a link to the recording after the event. And if you have any questions, we'd love to hear from you. You should see in the bottom of your Zoom window a Q&A panel. Please type your question in there, and we will be addressing them at the end of the session, time all being available, which I'm very hopeful of. So let's move on and meet our panel. We have Shannon Gilchrist, Program Coordinator of Plug-in BC, Keegan Tully, General Manager at IV Charging Network, Maxime Charron, President and Founder of LeadingAhead Energy, and Cara, CEO of SWTCH Energy. So if we could invite each member of the panel to expand on that introduction and chat a bit about your role and your organization and your experience in this sector. So first of all, if we can kick off with Shannon.
Hello, so like Nino said, my name is Shannon Gilchrist. I am a program coordinator at the Fraser Basin Council in the Plug-in BC program. Plug-in BC is a central resource in British Columbia for information on electric vehicle programs and incentives. We also administer quite a few provincial programs for zero-emission vehicles, which include the Emotive Outreach Program, which most people in BC involved in EVs will be familiar with, the Specialty Use Vehicle Incentive, and then the reason I'm here today, which is the Clean BC Go Electric Public Charger Program, which is being funded by the Ministry of Energy, Mines and Petroleum, or Low Carbon Innovation.
Sounds like a new name there.
It's a very new name.
Great. Thanks very much, Shannon. Keegan, if I could invite you. And
wrong button there. My name's Keegan Tully. I'm the general manager of IV Charging Network. So IV is a joint venture between Ontario Power Generation and Hydro One, and we operate in Ontario. So we're building the largest, most connected fast charger network in the province. It's about 160 fast chargers by the end of this year, spread right across Ontario.
Cool, thanks, Keegan. Maxime, if I can invite you on.
Hi, my name is Maxime. Thanks for having me today, Nino. This is great to be presenting. So as Nino mentioned, I'm the president of LeadingAhead Energy. We're a Canadian-based company providing electric vehicle charging infrastructure expertise. We advise and supply governments, corporate fleets, and the real estate portfolio and development sector on the deployment of their EV infrastructure strategy. So having access to many different EV solutions, hardware and software, we provide both portfolio level strategic advice and site level technical expertise. We add value to our clients' projects by ensuring that the charging service is vendor agnostic, future-proofed, well-designed, and delivers on the business case. So
cool.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Maxime. It's great. And Cara.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cara Lee, and I'm the CEO at SWTCH Energy. SWTCH operates one of the largest open standards-based networks in Canada. We have over 600 charging stations networked across Canada. We are proud members of the Global Open Charge Alliance, and our open charging platform is fully OCPP certified. we specialize in EV charging within high density settings, so including apartments, condominiums, offices, and commercial buildings. Really glad to be part of the discussion today.
Great, thanks, Carter, and thanks to everyone on the panel for coming on today and sharing your knowledge. So let's move into the session. So I often hear that when you buy charging infrastructure, it's a bit like buying a cell phone. And the typical thing with a cell phone is where you choose your hardware, you can choose what phone you have, but then you can also choose what network you run it on. And these days you can obviously mix and match and kind of choose what you want in that regard. So using that metaphor, is it really right that a charging unit, the hardware, is really like a cell phone, and then you can kind of connect that to the internet through a network that kind of gives you a bunch of other services like measurement and payment systems and things like that. Carter, perhaps you could expand on that explanation, and if you view that as being a good one.
Yeah, it's definitely a great way of looking at it. So, the way I see it is, when I look at a charging station, I see it as like a cell phone. And a charging network is similar to a cell phone network provider, like a Bell or a Telus. Typically, when you say go to a Telus or Bell store, there's a selection of phones that you can pick out that that you may like based on aesthetic or functionality or whatever that work with that network. So similarly, when you pick a charging network and you want to put in charging stations, they have a selection of different chargers that suit your needs, whether it be like a workplace or a DC fast charging on the highways, and everything's great, But what happens when you realize that your cell phone reception isn't great in that, in the cottage that you just bought, or this customer service is not exceptional or problematic at times? In the context of cell phones and cell phone providers, the simple solution is to take your cell phone and go to another provider, right? You don't like Bell, let's go to Telus. Different plans, different services. And that's really that flexibility, of choosing, of being able to choose which service provider is great for your needs. And that flexibility, ensures that network operators are, really focused on reliability, price, and features. But what if the cell phone is locked to that cell phone provider that you initially signed up with? Unless you're willing to throw away that perfectly good cell phone, you won't be able to switch to another provider, unless that phone is unlocked, So that's how I really seem to look at it in terms of a network provider and its hardware. Is the hardware locked to that network provider? Can I take that, investment, that hardware that I purchased, and then can I switch it to another network? And for me, I think that's really the key to future-proofing your investment. Having unlocked hardware gives you the flexibility of choice to use that network, to use it with a network provider that best suits your needs. So yeah.
Thanks, Carter. Yeah, good to understand in more detail. So from your explanation, it's clear that even though property managers and site hosts can buy a whole solution from one provider, if the charging station is unlocked, to use the cell phone thing, they still have the choice about which network that charger can actually run on. So Maxime, this would be a good one perhaps for you to expand on. There's lots of different manufacturers of chargers, and there are a number of charging networks. Can you explain what the open standard is, to use that term, and how it kind of fits, and what it is in this space to enable that that flexibility, if you like?
Yeah, so I'm not going to repeat what Carter just mentioned, as he explained exactly what OCPP was with the cell phone analogy, but I just want to kind of break a few myths to begin with, where you might have heard that OCPP is not a high enough standard, and it's not good enough or as good as other networks. Well, when we ship charging stations, they're always preloaded with the network provider on it. So you don't need any on-site programming or anything like that. And it's also, OCPP is also the main standard all across Europe. So it is, I mean, if it's good enough for Europe, obviously in North America, we shouldn't have any problem at that point either. So basically what you can do is really avoiding to get your stranded assets. So basically, if you're starting with one provider, you can keep that hardware and move to a different provider, but also level 2 and level 3 charging stations are very different. So you might want to go with one hardware for your level 2 and have a different hardware for level 3 amongst your portfolio, or even one site, but you want to use the same provider. And it's very important to make sure that those two are OCPP, so you don't have two different platforms to run level 2 and level 3s.
Thanks, Maxime. That's great. Good to broaden the understanding of it here. So let's get a utility perspective on this. And you know, Keegan, as you said in your introduction, Hydro One and the OPG have last year launched the IV charging network, and in doing so made a substantial investment in public charging infrastructure. And you opted for the open protocol in that solution. Could you share some of the thought process that brought you and your colleagues to that decision?
Absolutely. I think, you know, as we were preparing to make this investment, we did a lot of due diligence on the different options that were out there. And ultimately, you know, we felt that OCPP was the right choice. And it was all about flexibility for us. You know, when we look at this industry, you know, it's really at its infancy. There's, you know, 50,000 electric vehicles in Ontario out of a total of over 8 million vehicles. And so what we wanted was a solution that could grow with the industry as the industry grows. And so it was important that the technology we chose could allow that evolution. So we wanted to be able to take advantages as hardware evolves and new features become available, charging speeds get faster, and we just really wanted to be able to choose and follow the hardware providers that were innovating. And the same side on software, you know, so we are a network operator, but there's also the opportunity to take advantage of software evolution too, as you know, new features and different business models arise in the industry. We just needed to make sure that we could take advantage of those opportunities. So that's really what it was about for us, was just making sure that the solution that we adopted was going to keep up and allowed us the flexibility to do so.
So flexibility and a bit of future. I mean, as per the title of the session, a bit of future proofing in anticipation of that new tech. Cool, thanks, Keegan. And Shannon, what about from a public funding perspective? Plug-in BC has supported the investment of a significant charging infrastructure, obviously in public places, and you've maintained that recipients of your funding should use the Open Charge Point Protocol. Can you explain why that was important to you and why that's still something that's a requirement of your program?
Yeah, so with the public charger program, the OCPP requirement has actually been in the program guide since day one. So that was something that the province really wanted to see, the province of BC really wanted to see. And at Plug-in BC, we agreed with them. The goal for the public charger program is to fill in network gaps in the DC fast charging infrastructure within BC. And right now, a lot of those gaps, although there are gaps in really dense urban areas where we're seeing a lot of EV uptake, like Victoria and Vancouver, we have essentially no coverage in northern regions and then also in some remote communities. And one of the concerns that you get when you start moving into places that don't already have DCFCs is that they're kind of considered undesirable locations. So sometimes they can have spotty Wi-Fi coverage, maybe spotty mobile coverage, and it becomes something where it's kind of difficult to run a networked station in those areas. But it was also very important to have networked stations so that people knew about the availability of the station, where it is, and all of the different information you can get from it that way. So, in considering those remote areas, we wanted to make sure that people were not stuck with a machine that can only work on one network. And that was the big thing, because if you have a network that suddenly says, well, we're not able to provide a consistent service in the area, so we're just not going to provide the service in that area at all, or charging huge amounts of money to offer the service in that area, and we didn't want the applicants to the program to be stuck in situations like that, just because we acknowledge that a lot of the applicants to the program don't have huge amounts of experience in EV charging infrastructure, right? And when you have a network that drops a machine and the machine cannot work on any other networks, you end up with stranded assets, which are just like very expensive metal boxes sitting on the side of the road.
Yeah, that's going to be the worst experience as a driver, and I think any EV driver is keen to avoid that at all costs.
Yes.
Thanks for expanding on that. So one of the growing areas for deployment of charging infrastructure is in buildings, and obviously in particular multi-unit residential buildings like condominiums and stratas, affectionately referred to as MURBs, multi-unit residential buildings. And so for real estate developers who are involved in the construction phase of MURBs, their choice of charging hardware and really the way they set it up can have implications for property managers who end on running that facility in the long term. And Cara, I know this is an area of expertise that you've worked in quite a lot. Could you expand on this and just highlight why developers in particular should be very, very mindful about what they're speccing?
Yeah, it's great question, and I think it's something that is really important that we focus on, because as we know, real estate developers, it takes years for pre-construction to construction to actually handing it off to the property management company, and that timeline is frequently 3 to 5 years. And the pace of change within our industry, as we've just seen in the last 5 years, is incredible, right? So when real estate developers initially pick their platform or their hardware or their system, things are very different to the point when they're actually handing the keys off to the residents and the condo owners. So throughout that time, there's an exchange of the contracts that the real estate developers initially signed to when the property management company takes over from the real estate developer and then is now managing these assets, whether it be washing machines or charging stations or elevators. All those contracts are fairly comprehensive and complicated. So when we want to have that process simplified, you don't want to give them these contracts that are tied to necessarily a specific vendor. When you hear property managers talk about proprietary systems, I think a lot of them have experiences with elevators, essentially, where a specific elevator company requires the company to hire a specific maintenance group that is certified for that product. Well, the similar thing is that if you pick a proprietary system with proprietary hardware, the ability to service them and to manage them becomes very limited, essentially. And being that, especially now, we're seeing these regulations in Toronto and Vancouver where you have a EV readiness requirement of 20 to 100%. There are a lot of charging stations invested in that building. Now, if it's tied to a proprietary network, you're talking about maybe 100, 200 chargers within within these new buildings that will be forever tied to a specific network provider. So again, talking about previously of what happens if the service becomes not so reliable, what happens if there are newer features in another group, you don't have that flexibility anymore, to decide what's the best service for you. It's kind of saying like, if you bought a Bell cell phone, you're going to be with Bell. And for such a fast changing industry, you don't want to have be locked in indefinitely to one service provider. I mean, there's no incentive for them to provide the best service, because they know that you don't really have a choice, right? But also B is that it gives good competition is always good for the end user. We are always trying to pick whatever is the best fit for us in terms of our cell phone service, which has more data, which has more talk time, all these other things. If we were just stuck to a certain cell phone provider, then they wouldn't really care that much. So this is why we think it's really important for a real estate developer to pick the hardware to be implemented in these buildings, because ultimately these contracts will have consequences 5, 10, 20 years down the line, because those are those assets that are now installed within these buildings. So in summary, the idea is to give the property management companies as much flexibility in choosing what is the best service provider for them. And there's a lot of, I guess, not necessarily confusion, but misunderstanding that just because you pick an open standards-based hardware doesn't preclude you from actually using that hardware onto more proprietary networks. They can use those charging stations. So, in terms of the risk of putting in open standards hardware within a multi-unit residential setting, I think it's really a no-brainer, because you're ultimately just giving your residents, your property management companies, more flexibility in choosing what is ideal for them. So yeah.
Yeah, and I would just add to that it's not only the charging station that you're putting in at the time of construction, but it's also going to have an effect on the future chargers that are going to be able to be installed in that same building, which will have to be the exact same company if you want to do some load sharing or they want to talk to the same network. So it's not just the chargers that you're putting in at that time, but also all the expansion that you might start with 20, but in 5 years from now, you might see 100. And they want to have a choice to go with the exact same company, regardless if it's the best solution or not at that time. And we're seeing a lot of concerns among strata councils and developers as well, because they are liable to strata for the first year. And that's starting to raise a few eyebrows for sure for the new residents. But also developers are starting to focus a lot more on rental buildings, which inherently they are becoming the owner of those charging stations because they are owning the building. So that increases the concern overall of going through OCPP versus proprietary network.
Great, thank you both for that discussion. And Carter, if we can just revisit this from a driver's point of view and how the open protocol impacts the user experience. Could you is there a difference that a user would experience if they're running on an open network?
I think the goal of standardization is that you don't have to think about different platforms and different systems. If you think about, I don't know, like as simple as plugging in your 110-volt plug, at least in the same continent, you're never gonna have to worry about it being different plugs, right? And we're still at that stage in EV charging where there's a CHAdeMO plug and a CCS plug. And the way I see it is open standards and standardization ultimately gives you and leads you to a universal standard where it just makes it a lot easier for the end driver to interact with these charging stations because they all function the same way. So, there's a few technologies in the pipeline in our industry that, we foresee it being really key to achieving that goal. And, one of the standards is this technology called plug-in charge, which is very similar to what Tesla has done through their Tesla supercharger networks. And how it works essentially is you simply take a charging station and you plug it into your car, and that's it. It functions as a non-network charging station but all the payments, the information is done automatically, and the communication is done automatically between the car and the charging stations. And this is becoming, there's getting a lot of momentum in this space. You know, there's been, Ford has adopted this model, Porsche has adopted this model, Lucid and Volkswagen are all coming out with cars that support this system. And we believe that, you know, standardization will ultimately lead us to the most, you know, seamless user experience, which is really, you know, not having any experience at all. It's just like plugging in your car. But that requires cooperation within our industry, you know, to want to work towards that sort of standardization and universal standard. So, you know, as much as, you know, we've seen these format wars between, I don't know, like, what do you want to call it, HD DVD and Blu-ray, or if you're, you know, if you want to like look really back, you know, Betamax and VHS, eventually, you know, a universal standard becomes available, and then ultimately end users benefit from that universally shared standard, because there's no difference between, you know, one network versus another. You don't have to carry a dozen RFID tap cards. You don't have to download over a dozen mobile applications, because it has been standardized. So, you know, we're hoping that becomes prevalent sooner than later, but we see a lot of the OEM car manufacturers adopting this standard into the cars, the Ford Mustang Mach-E, the Lucid Air, the Volkswagen ID4, the Porsche Taycan. These are all plug-in charge ready. And we're also seeing the network providers such as Electrify America actually providing that service now. So, you know, hopefully we get to that point where it's the most seamless, you know, user experience, where it's just, there's no experience at all, essentially.
I like that. There's no experience at all. So we've heard of, you know, great discussion from the panel so far. You know, we've heard of some of the advantages with regard to rural chargers, with regard to multi-use buildings, the role that open standards can play in a general standardization of charging networks, the benefits for, you know, future-proofing and you know, flexibility. It's probably a good time to talk about downsides, because with any great new technology, there's always, you know, there's always something that people need to be aware of, and so it'd be good to, you know, just to expand on this. So, Shannon, you know, what are the downsides that you've found through your work? You know, you obviously been working with the technology for a while now.
Yeah, so mainly the downsides for us started coming up when we were doing the consultation session. I had heard a bit from an installer before the public charger program ever came around about difficulty he had had with level 2 stations. And that was actually changing the network provider for the level 2 stations, that it was just ending up being a lot of work in changing hardware actually in the actual unit. And it was getting to the point where it was costing about the same amount to buy another level 2 unit that would work better with the new network. We heard similar things when we were going through with the public charger program, which is a direct current fast charger program, where it can get quite expensive in changing the machine over between network providers, just because there's hardware changes that sometimes have to happen. It's not always as simple as just loading up a new kind of operating system onto the machine and just expecting it to go. There may be some new components that you need to add. There may be components that you have to take away, and the cost can just add up quite a bit. So that's something that we kind of had to consider when we were including it as a requirement in our program. And because it is a requirement, it's not just a thing that we're like, please do this. It's actually something that we have to have them do and comply with. At the end of the day, we kind of decided that the benefit of it outweighed the additional cost. Although more than the cost of the unit.
Oh, Shannon, sorry, I'm just going to interrupt you there. I don't know if the other panelists lost you for a moment there. Could you just repeat the last sentence?
Where did you lose me at?
The costs of switching?
The which, sorry?
The costs of switching?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So what we heard from the folks in our consultation session was basically that the cost of switching a DCFC between two network providers wasn't ending up being more than the cost of an entirely new charging station. So that's kind of why we ultimately ended up moving forward with it, just because it feels like a better option for the applicants.
Great, thanks Shannon for sharing that. And Keegan, how about yourself? What downsides have you identified in your year plus of running the network?
Yeah, I think, you know, with openness comes choice, which can be a good thing, but it can also be overwhelming, and I think it also requires more due diligence on what you're buying. So, you know, particularly around hardware, you have to make sure that you're buying good hardware that's reliable, because I think ultimately that's key for everybody here, is offering a solution that's reliable so people can charge when they show up. So I think it's really important to work with somebody that has experience dealing with the hardware and has vetted the hardware in advance, and you're not just choosing anything, and you're choosing hardware that, you know, your network operator has some experience with. That's also helpful, because there are ins and outs and extra diagnostic tools and things like that can benefit, you know, provide a reliability benefit. So I would say that can be one of the downsides, is that you don't always know exactly what you're getting if you just choose any sort of hardware solution.
Yeah, and to kind of further on that, I think Keegan, you've made a great point there, where like one of the downside of going OCPP is that you might have, you know, get yourself into having too many choices. And that's when it's really important to make sure that you talk to an expert or somebody who's had experience with either the software or the hardware that you're about to install. Whether somebody suggested a turnkey solution or you just kind of investigate it on your own. Because especially with the amount of chargers on the market, you can have chargers right now that are upgradable. You can have DC fast chargers that are charging 2 cars at the same time and not just one. So it eliminates the expense for 2 units essentially, and just making it into one. And also, like I said, upgradable. So if you want to start with a 50 kilowatts or 90 kilowatts, you can upgrade it all the way to 150 or 200, depending on the brand. So that's all the steps that needs to be looked at in terms of future proofing. It can also be the footprint during the design of your site, where one charger might have a greater footprint than another one. And it's going to allow you to put 2 or 3 chargers within a footprint that you could have put 1 or 2 with other providers. So it's all those type of things that every site is kind of different, and there's no one size fit all for every single site.
Cool. Thanks, Keegan. Thanks, Maxime. So on the point of, I mean, Keegan touched on, you know, as Maxime did, you know, working with vendors and, you know, they're doing the kind of, you know, doing work to make sure we're actually making good selections and so on. If you're working with a vendor and you're looking to ensure that you're working with an open standard solution, and how do you make sure you're using the same language as the vendors that you're approaching? And you know, Shannon, how do you define it? Because also you help your applicants actually, you know, go through this process.
Yeah, so I'll read off the official definition. So in our program guide, we say that the station needs to be OCPP compatible, and we define that as the property of a charger having OCPP installed and able to be controlled by any OCPP network operator upon agreement with the charger's owner, not limited by hardware, software, or contract, except for a limited term, to any one network operator. So it's essentially anybody can operate the station. Any network that exists within BC for our program can operate the station. And that was really important to put in there, just because we do have kind of this discrepancy happening that we noticed, which is the difference between an open network and an OCPP network, where a lot of times open networks can be operated on machines that are from kind of outside of their business umbrella, but other networks cannot come and operate their machines. But we need it to go both ways. So your network has to work on somebody else's machine, but somebody else's network also has to come in and be able to work on your machine.
Thanks, Shannon. So those are kind of like the defining, like if there was some different defining questions that might be at the two phrases used at the end is, can your machine work on somebody else's network? And can your network work with somebody else's machine? Or maybe I said the same thing. But yeah, can we use your hardware on another network, or can your equipment run on your network? Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's something because we saw from a couple of kind of proprietary networks that their network worked perfectly fine on other equipment, but other networks could not actually access their charging equipment in some cases.
And I guess going back to the point about switching, also asking about maybe the cost of switching as well at the point of commissioning, if you like.
Yeah, if you have to completely disassemble the entire charging equipment, it's not compatible.
Great. Thanks for setting out. Thanks for sharing that with us. So putting open standards into a broader context is how prevalent is this standard here in North America? Now, Maxime, you referenced the fact that it's somewhat widely used in Europe, and Cara, what's your experience or knowledge of adoption here in North America?
Yeah, so compared to Europe, it's definitely, I'd say, less developed in terms of open standard networks. I think predominantly because of the US networks, when they first started getting funding, they didn't have access to open standard networks. So, and to no fault their own, they had to develop their own network essentially. But as open standards such as OCPP has really matured in the last 5 years, we've really seen kind of like an emergence of new networks within North America that use the OCPP standard. The most prominent one would probably be Electrify America. That's the part of the Volkswagen's $100 million, like $700 million billion settlement with the whole Dieselgate scandal, is that they've used that component of their settlement to build a network, and they chose OCPP as their standard for the networks. So really, we're seeing an emergence of OCPP networks, including Ivy, including Electrify America, including Petro-Canada's network. We're really seeing an emergence of a lot of really established organizations that are adopting the standard for North America. And but to the point about the whole OCPP standard maturity thing, I think we need to look at just how prevalent OCPP it is in general. OCPP is in 78 countries in all continents except for Antarctica. It has over 50,000 charging station network across the world. When you're in Europe, you can literally drive from France all the way to Poland through a dozen different charging networks, and they're all OCPP based. So, the kind of perspective that OCPP is not a fully baked standard, I think could have been, argued 3-5 years ago. But at this current stage, and seeing just how prevalent it is across the world, I would say that it's a very, very mature and reliable standard. OPG and Hydro One, when they chose their network, I'm sure they did do their due diligence. Petro-Canada, Electrify America, they all did their due diligence, and ultimately they saw open standards offering the most flexibility. And I think ultimately we can converge as an industry so that, we were talking about that user experience, that, it does become standardized and offer the best experience for the end user. So yeah.
Cool, thanks Carter. Good context. And so we've got, I'm really thrilled, we've got a bunch of questions, which is really great, that's coming from the audience. So we're gonna switch to take on some of the audience questions. Just before we do, from the sort of this part of the panel, I'd just like to give the last word to Keegan and the Ivy charging network. Keegan, you've invested a large amount of money in setting up the network and placed a big bet on open standards. Any regrets a year after the program launch, and any advice you'd give to others who are at that stage that you were, probably a couple of years ago now?
No regrets. I think, we're really happy with the direction we've gone. We're building out a network, it's operating reliably, and that's like a key priority for us, is that when somebody drives up to our chargers, they can get a charge. That's the sort of most basic and fundamental thing that we need to offer, and we're doing that. I think Max sort of alluded to some of the innovation that's happening with chargers. We're seeing that, and we're really happy that we're able to take advantage of the new solutions that are coming out. But at the same time, I think we've definitely learned some lessons. We've gone with multiple hardware vendors, and I think we've learned that some are more reliable than others, and have different offerings. But ultimately, I think it sort of proves the path that we went, because in the future, we can shift away from hardware vendors and go with the ones that are reliable, and that's really what this was all about, not having all of our eggs in one basket. And so overall, we're definitely happy. And I think for other people that are looking at it, do your due diligence. Spending a little bit of time upfront to do your research and make your choice is a good way to go, because you don't want to pay for it down the line. And talking with people that have expertise in this area, like Ivy, like Max Switch, that's a good way to go and really figure out how you're going to get a reliable solution, because you're spending a lot of money, and it's really important that the charging works, because I think that's a important thing for the industry while it's in its infancy, is that people can drive up, get a charge, and be on their way.
That's really helpful. Thanks for sharing that. Great. So we'll take some questions, which we have already lined up, courtesy of Zoom software. I'll put the question out to the group, and I'll let whoever would like to kind of take it to dive in. First one from Keith Barrett. Are there any cyber security concerns with OCPP? Or I guess every technology has security concerns. So what are the concerns? Let me push it a little bit further.
Carter, I think you might be the best one to answer this.
Yeah, so based on the actual connections itself, it is very, very robust. I mean, I don't want to get into the technical details too much, but this is OCPP 1.6J is WebSockets based, and it has 256-bit security encryption and all these technical things but I don't know if that will necessarily answer most of your questions. I think if you want to do your own research, search up OCPP 1.6J security, and there are a lot of white papers around it that give you really in-depth details of what they do to secure the network. I think it's better to read it and see it yourselves, and you hear it from my mouth, in terms of like what is secure and what is not secure. But there's been a lot of focus around security. The 1.6J variant was actually spun off from a large utility in the Netherlands, and cyber security and utilities it's a major focus for that sector. So it was built with security really as a key pillar of the protocol. So yeah, feel free to Google it. It's on the Open Charge Alliance's website, and there's like immense amount of detail describing the security features of OCPP.
Thank you. Question from Ian Neville. Can one of the panelists give us a rough idea of how many OCPP network providers are presently operating in Canada and or BC? How does growth in terms of the number of market players look over the next few years?
I can take this one. In Canada right now, in BC, I'd say there's about 3 or 4 network providers that can do a really great job in providing the service. But more and more, we're also seeing American companies that are targeting the Canadian market. So even though they might not be here now, if you're making sure that your hardware is OCPP, well, 2, 3, 5 years down the road, you're going to have access to a lot more option in terms of network providers, whether it's terms of fees, features, or services that they can provide.
Thank you. Question from Andrew McCready. Are there charger regulatory bodies established in any provinces or federally to oversee this important emerging business sector?
I don't know, not that I'm aware of. You know, other than like Measurement Canada, you know, things like that. But that's more on selling, you know, certain volumes of electricity. I don't know if anybody else has something to add.
Yeah, so every single charger that is legally installed needs to be at least UL or CSC certified. Otherwise, it's just not going to be. It won't be passing the electrical inspection once the charger is going to be installed. So if you're buying one off the shelf or, you know, something that you can buy on the internet, make sure that it's got the UL certification on it.
Thank you. A question from Brendan McEwen. Thanks for the conversation. We see a lot of potential value for OCPP networks to be used in home charging, in multifamily buildings, and workplace charging. Can anyone share examples of deployments of load-managed EVSE sharing across a circuit, either in a multifamily building or workplace, which uses different charging station manufacturers conducting all communications across OCPP? Or an example where a MERB or workplace has switched their OCPP network service provider. Appreciate not everybody might have an answer for that.
Yeah, I'll go, and if anybody wants to add on it, that'd be great. So everything's pretty new, so within 2 years, I'd say. So physically, I haven't seen anybody switching network providers, but we have done tests with chargers just to make sure that it was possible. And so you just pretty much plug a charger in the wall and make sure that you can do your transition from one provider to another, just like in a real life scenario. And there has been no issues whatsoever.
Okay, thanks. Question from Elise Wilton. Does the cell phone analogy continue in the area that cell phones become obsolete, or within a few years?
I think that's a philosophical question, right? So, and I don't know if any of us are, you know, smart enough or futurist enough to kind of anticipate that, but I leave it to other panelists to maybe answer that question.
I kind of like this question because, and that's a concern of us. I've got a sustainability background, and one of the concern is that we're focusing a lot on how green the cars are, but we're not really focusing on the infrastructure. And if we're going to install infrastructure that lasts only for 3-5 years because they're obsolete, or the new software does not apply to their new platform, and you need to replace the charging station that is still functioning, well, what's really the carbon emission that's going to be coming out of a charger that doesn't last at least 10 years? Whether it needs to be replaced because of malfunction or software integration, That is something that I think it's increasingly important to go with no CPP solution instead of switching network providers and having to replace also your charging stations that are fully functional.
And I don't know if the question was getting at something like inductive charging or where exactly it's coming from, but I'd see like kind of like what Max is saying, it enables that, right? If some new charging company builds a new inductive charger and the vehicles have the capability to take it, you know, it could potentially work on OCPP and use that standard as well, right? And so I really see it as enabling and preventing obsolescence.
Thank you both. A question from Malcolm Wheeler. What do you see as the drawbacks for utility/government level 2 rebate MERB programs that would implement a mandatory OCPP network requirement?
Well, I think the silence of everyone kind of says it all. I don't think we have anything against that since it's already rolling out for public charging for the DC fast charger program in BC. If it further goes along with level 2s, I think it would be a great solution. Personally, if it's a private company who wants to go for a proprietary network and have done their due diligence, they got great solution as well, go for it. But if you're going to use public funding and public money to fund proprietary network solutions, then that might be something that is worth having a conversation on.
Yeah, I don't think there's necessarily drawbacks. I don't know, especially in BC, if I would see it happening anytime soon. I know that the utilities in BC don't mind having proprietary chargers and proprietary networks in their kind of network of chargers. It doesn't seem, from the conversations we've had, they don't seem to be too concerned about it. So I don't see them. And the context of that is that in BC, they are the delivery agents for the actual rebate for home and MERB chargers.
I would say that if there was like a specific issue that I see with, allowing both OCPP and proprietary networks within the same kind of building, is that it does affect the ability to manage loads and energy and to integrate with the building energy management system. If the idea is that all the chargers, and it doesn't have to be necessarily the same brand of OCPP chargers, if they function on a protocol, it can theoretically be easier to integrate them together and integrate with the existing building energy management system. If you have a hodgepodge of proprietary, Tesla, even though the plugs are different, and then non-network level 2 charging stations, and they put them all together, I would say it's probably not possible to do any energy management. And as more and more stations are implemented and deployed in these settings, energy management becomes more and more important. So I think the standardization component is important if we want to consider energy management as an important aspect of that deployment.
Yeah, I think the other thing to add to that is that if they opt to go to the route of not requiring OCPP or not choosing a standard, then there would have to be a lot more education on the part of whoever the delivery agent is for a rebate program, just to make sure that they know things like, your proprietary charger and your open network charger are not going to work to the best of their abilities together. If you choose to kind of have, a whole bunch of different brands, a whole bunch of different manufacturers, a couple of different networks, it's just never going to work kind of optimally.
Thank you all. So I'm just going to open up the panel just to, if anybody on the panel would like to add any more comment or to answer any specific question that I've not addressed so far in the just last closing minutes. There's still a tremendous number of really great questions there. Thank you for everybody who submitted. I tried to just apply the focus on OCPP, given the theme of the subject. But there's clearly a lot of interest in a lot of adjacent questions to this space. So yeah, so unless anybody on the panel has any further comments or questions to add.
What I would add is just to make sure that you do your due diligence, that what we're seeing in the market a lot is, but like many vendors are going directly to the client, and obviously they all want to sell, so they're all the best, but to do their own due diligence to make sure that one might fit their needs better than others, depending on the type of building that they run, or if it's a level 2 or level 3 type of scenario, is very important. Also, I would say that proprietary networks do provide great solution as well. It's really up to you to decide what route you'd like to go towards. And if you don't mind the locking in solution, and you're okay with the less future proofing or possible stranded asset in the future, then there's no reason not to. But if that's a concern of you, I'd say I would suggest to look into OCPP and having a broader education on that front for sure.
Great, thanks, Maxime. So with that, we'll call it a wrap. Thank you to all of our panelists for sharing your expertise and really great knowledge. And thank you to everyone in the audience for attending. A special thank you to SWTCH Energy for presenting this webinar. We'll be sharing a link, as I mentioned earlier on, to a recording in the next few days, which of course anyone in the audience is welcome to share. So thank you, everybody. Thanks for everyone, all those questions. Sorry we didn't get to them all, but I'm sure we'll be doing more of these sessions.